On Wednesday, podcaster Pablo Tori published a report that the Clippers circumvented the NBA salary cap.
Labeling him as a podcaster does not paint him in a negative light. Pablo Tori already has more journalistic integrity than ESPN as a collective entity throughout its entire history. Everybody knows that Pablo is right. And now, by downplaying the story, ESPN looks actually worse than it did by the fact that it would have never covered this story to begin with. And here, we have the use of the word podcaster to make Pablo come across as less than, as just someone random who published a story. Well, that random podcaster is now having you react to his story. And we're going to play a few clips. What has happened throughout, there are several things happening right now. One is Pablo has introduced an entirely new niche in media. And I say entirely new, not because the concept is new, but because nobody does this. And so he's really carving out his own niche, but he's also making the existing media look especially bad. And here we have ESPN being legacy and mainstream media. And then we're also going to look at Bill Simmons, who is, let's put him in independent media. Bill Simmons is a rather large entity now. He's grown The Ringer. The Ringer has been very successful, but of course, they're not engaged in investigative journalism either. So now they're forced to come to terms with this story, and they're having difficulty doing so. So here with Ramona Shelburne interviewing Steve Ballmer, she says, podcaster. We also see other ESPN chess pieces come forward, and they are downplaying the story, tempering what any type of punishment that the Clippers might receive. And this only has aged worse as more information comes out. And then we also have Mark Cuban, who, of course, is a figurehead. It's maybe not figurehead is not the right word, but he is a prominent person within the NBA sphere. And he's come out and labeled himself as Team Ballmer, and has gone on 2 podcasts that I know of, Pablo Torre's and Road Trippin' with Richard Jefferson, and actually vigorously defended Steve Ballmer, which is curious in and of itself. But we're going to focus in on ESPN and Bill Simmons for this, and we're going to play a few clips. Now I'm going to move to this next clip where we have the Bill Simmons podcast addressing this with just 22 minutes and 30 seconds of coverage. We've got Van Lathan, we've got Kris Mannix from Sports Illustrated, and we've also got Bill Simmons. And here, this segment is not even at the beginning of the podcast. It's right in the middle of a 2-hour podcast. Bill Simmons seems totally disinterested in covering this. And it's not like Bill Simmons is engaged in investigative journalism anyway. That's not the fault here. The fault is that this is normally a story that Bill Simmons would be all over. We'd see emergency pods. He'd be bringing on extra guests. Everyone would be talking about it, dissecting it, looking at it from different angles, looking at the fallout, looking at who's affected. And Bill Simmons seems to have no interest in covering this and really downplays it. And so what Bill Simmons does, let's actually get to that in a moment. But first, let's play a line from Van Lathan.
Story right now, which is a huge sports story. The choice is whether or not to make this the biggest sports story of the decade.
So that's the setup here. This is the biggest story of the decade, potentially. And let's now fast forward 1 minute and let's get Bill Simmons' reaction.
Punishments and severe punishments to make an example of someone. It remains to be seen whether this version of it is going to do the same.
Can we talk about how funny this story is? I know it's not supposed to be funny, but let's be honest. Nobody got hurt. Rules were broken, but it didn't help the Clippers. Nothing really happened. They've won 3 playoff series in 6 years. First of all,
so Bill Simmons downplays the story, and then he uses 2 tactics that he's used before. It's not really 2 tactics, but it's a combination of designating something as stupid and or funny. So this is Bill Simmons also downplaying in a different way. We saw him actually materially downplaying by saying that nobody got hurt. The Clippers didn't do well anyway. But then he brings up that this is a funny story and this is a stupid story. And it's not just this clip. I covered this in a previous episode. I'll link to that in the description. But he is very much and very overtly downplaying this story. Why would Bill Simmons not cover this story in greater depth? All right, so let's continue on. And on this next clip, we have Zach Lowe. This is his second podcast episode since the story was broken. He originally covered it. He had a very mild and tempered reaction. And now actually this is that episode where he had the tempered reaction, but he does call it a major story. So let's play the clip.
There's going to be more of this as all of us around the league make calls and try to figure out what's going on here. It's an absolutely, it's a huge, whatever happens, it is at this moment a huge story. One of the biggest non-basketball stories that has happened in the last 5 to 10 years in the NBA.
And when I say tempered, I mean he originally states that he doesn't think that much will happen to the Clippers. He doesn't really think the Clippers will be significantly punished. But the reason why I wanted to play this clip is Zach Lowe just said that this is one of the biggest non-basketball stories in the last 5 to 10 years. His own words. Then he has Bill Simmons join him on the Zach Lowe show. And what do they talk about? They talk about the 2028 USA men's basketball team and what the roster will be. You have this major developing story with new information coming out on a semi-daily basis. And then you have the two biggest NBA personalities, podcasting personalities, joining together. And what do they talk about? The 2028 USA men's basketball team. So right there, it's just asking the question, why is that the response? Why aren't you more interested in this story? All right, so let's play another clip. This is from the Bill Simmons podcast. This is where Bill Simmons, I think this is where he first addresses the scandal from Pablo Tori, and he's got Joe House, a regular guest on.
The journalist Pablo Tori.
Yeah, he journalisted it up.
He sure did.
This was a great story by him.
The shit out of this. Great job.
He really did. Good job by him.
All right, so the awkward start there is because Bill Simmons has had a rift with Pablo Tori, and I believe this is because Bill Simmons either insinuated or outright said that Pablo Tori wasn't a real journalist because he covered the Bill Belichick girlfriend story. And so now he's forced to come to terms with this because it is a major story, and he does have to cover it somewhat. I mean, Bill Simmons is known as an NBA podcaster, but that's why there was that awkward start. But Bill Simmons, again, I wanted to add this in because he's forced to cover it, but he doesn't really want to. So let's now go to ESPN, and here we have Bobby Marks talking about the reaction to the initial podcast from Pablo Tori.
Directly went into Kawhi Leonard's pocket. I think it's going to be extremely, extremely, extremely difficult to do that. And the second, the Clippers are not dumb. If any of you were around in 2000 for the Joe Smith.
All right, so he says the Clippers aren't dumb, and he actually repeats that the Clippers don't have to be dumb here, and they're circumventing the salary cap. It doesn't, just because they get caught or just because this is found out, it doesn't mean that the Clippers are dumb. So there's a false equivalency that's going on. And it's being made by multiple people, including Mark Cuban, that the Clippers would be dumb to get caught, or if they made it this simple. It doesn't have to be dumb. Maybe it's lazy. It doesn't indicate that the Clippers are dumb. So let's go ahead and fast forward a little bit and play more from Bobby Marks.
Fake contracts in a draw, because they basically had Smith signing 1-year contract, a bigger contract on the horizon because of the skirt around the Bird provision here. And they got dinged $3.5 million. Kevin McHale came out to $3 million. The Clippers are not dumb to, first of all, leave a messy paper trail that they're going to basically ruin their franchise. It's basically the equivalent of the death penalty. And if you want,
actually, they did leave the paper trail. It's right there. Pablo Tori has shown us on his podcast. So this is aging poorly as well. So ESPN, Brian Windhorst, I believe, also had a very mild reaction to the story and downplayed whether or not the Clippers would get penalized. And it makes you think, why? These aren't organic reactions from a media company, which should be happy to have this story, a sensational headline that's real. It's captivating, it's attention grabbing, and yet they don't want to inflame this at all. In fact, they want to make it seem like it's not as big of a deal as it seems like it is, and it is at first glance. And so why this is the case, that's another story for itself, but it is the case. And now Pablo Tori, cleverly, he's got more information that's coming out, and the media should have known this would be the case, right? If you pay attention, Pablo Tori, I think his podcast is relatively new, but he was going to have more information. That's something that could have been anticipated, but they all spoke on this, and now it's really aging poorly because obviously the first episode, I don't even know why they were tempering it after the first episode because the evidence was so strong, but the evidence is continuing. And with the Dennis Wong part released now, it looks even more damning than it already was. But this is what salary cap circumvention would look like. And the fact that Bill Simmons doesn't think it's a story and ESPN doesn't think that that the NBA will penalize the Clippers or that there isn't enough here to make the connection, that's them painting their own narrative. And there's a reason why they're doing it. And we've seen Mark Cuban, of course, join in as well with this strange defense of Steve Ballmer and completely ignoring any evidence that directly contradicts his defense. He won't even concede anything, despite the fact that this is obviously on its face very compelling evidence. So Pablo Tori is establishing a new niche, and while doing so, he is making the existing media and the NBA chess pieces look extremely bad.